Good morning, I'm Scott Bacon. I'm the coordinator of digital initiatives at Kimball Library at Coastal Carolina University. So I'll talk briefly today about maintaining digital initiatives with limited staffing. Kind of scroll through, there we go. So I like the theme of this year's conference. It was kind of stimulating, getting back on the road. It's kind of an inspiring theme. So it made me think about highways and things like that, and then to cruise control. So is cruise control an appropriate metaphor to keep all these digital initiatives that I have in my institution kind of running at the same time? Can you just set it and forget it? And then I started thinking more about potentially, maybe it's more like spinning plates. Just kind of, you got to keep them all spinning all at once. If you don't, you leave one left and you might get a little crash there. So something to think about to frame and contextualize this talk today. So just a little bit about the university and the library. So CCU is a mid-size master's college and university from Carnegie classifications. We have about 10,000 FTE. And as my position, as the coordinator of digital initiatives, obviously I'm responsible for digital initiatives, but also many other things. So just to kind of give a contextualized view of that before we begin. A little bit about the digital initiatives that I'm responsible for. We have CCU Digital Commons, which is our university's institutional repository. And that's mostly student works at this point, but we have plans for faculty outreach ongoing. We have digital collections that I'm responsible for. And I also work closely with a local history expert to capture the community collections in our area. So that's a good partnership. Digital Commons has the ability to manage journals and conferences as well. So that's something that I manage throughout that system. We have a digital preservation program that I began, and also data management services where we provide services to researchers on campus based around the data management lifecycle. So how do we do all these things with basically just me? You have to kind of be savvy. We found one system to host multiple initiatives. Like I said before, we have digital commons. And so we're able to have our digital collections and our institutional repository on one system. Before we had Islandora and digital commons. And so just kind of pushing that to one saves you a lot of time with configuring and vendor relations and maintenance and administration. Hosting versus outsourcing, I recommend that smaller libraries opt for third-party hosting just to kind of save time and administration so you can get right-sized. We have a new merged department. The Information Technology and Collections Department is a merger of other departments, and so that helped us kind of streamline and minimize duplication of effort. I think it's important to know when to say no. We like librarians like to, do everything and serve all constituents. And instead of maybe no, maybe not yet is a better idea to say. It's important to at least have one meeting, even if it is to say not yet, just to kind of keep, a potential plate spinning, in the background until you can get to it. Our library administration works really hard to ensure that we have budgeting for our digital initiatives, which is very important. And we also have our initiatives as part of our assessment plan to ensure that the budget items stay priorities. I'll just move along to the takeaways here. Run a little short on time. Yes, I would just, suggest that fluid positions descriptions are often necessary. So my move to digital initiatives coordinator wouldn't have been possible if we hadn't offloaded some of my responsibilities to others in the library. It's important to support all library staff as content providers, so encourage them to be content creators and administrators in their own systems, things like SpringShare's LibGuides, whenever possible. Hiring the right type of people is important, so I would rather hire someone without experience than, who's willing to learn new things and be ambitious and dedicated. Standards are crucial. It's crucial to spend dedicated time organizing, standardizing workflows initially, and that'll save you time on the back end. Documentation in both ways, internally, but then also externally. If you're going to start a business partnership with a vendor, that's really important to see if they have the documentation that you will need, because you're going to be going to that a lot potentially. Small teams are very nice. One of the reasons we get a lot done is that our administration trusts us to do the work without a lot of interference, having to call a meeting to see if you need to call a meeting and stuff like that. short-term and long-term, excuse me, short-term and long-term planning together. So you should plan for the short-term and the long-term whenever possible. So right now we're keeping initiatives running on low-touch administration, but we're keeping an eye on the long-term when we can hire some key positions to take over those and really get detailed into it. And last but not least, don't be afraid to ask for help. Others are there and they might be able to help you. You don't have to do everything on your own, and it does take a village in many ways. So in conclusion, I would ask library management and smaller institutions at least to let your staff experiment a little bit. Let assessment be a little more organic if possible. Trust your staff and be there for them, when they identify needs that they may have and funding opportunities, and then help them fill out the little things that they don't have time to do. So I think we're on the right track. We're currently in the process of hiring several positions. So once we hire those positions and can get them trained, then they can kind of hit the ground running, and because we're kind of keeping all those plates spinning, to keep things up to date. We just hired a new university president, and he's a history buff, and so that speaks well to the possibilities for our special collections and archives. So that'll be really cool. Hopefully we'll get into that, and that's what I have for today. So thank you.
Hi there, my name is Katherine Brooks. I'm a collection analysis librarian at the Columbia University Libraries in New York City. And today I'm going to be talking about defining success in an evidence-based acquisition or EBA program. First, I'd like to acknowledge my team at Columbia University Libraries. A lot of people helped me with this work. I'm part of the EBA strategy team, as well as the Transforming eBooks team, and also a shout out to Ruth at Taylor and Francis. So in 2019, Columbia University Libraries decided to embark on our first EBA program. We were a little behind the times, perhaps, in this. And so a strategy team was formed to look into possible options. And we ended up choosing a program with Taylor and Francis that included, at the time, the beginning of the program, 90,000 titles, both frontlist and backlist titles, mainly from the social sciences and from the humanities, and mainly from the Routledge imprint within Taylor and Francis. One reason that we chose Taylor and Francis is that we already had a good relationship with that vendor, and we had a large annual spend on Routledge and Taylor and Francis titles already. And so this is what allowed us to think that maybe we could shift some funds around to actually fund this program. As you can see here in the first point, we already spent roughly 70% of the annual EBA program cost on Taylor and Francis approval slips. And we also spent a large amount on firm orders each year and purchased roughly 1,500 titles through firm orders. The EBA program would allow us to retain perpetual access to 800 to 1,000 titles per year based on our estimation of the average cost per title, and would give us substantial discounts for titles that we currently owned, either in print or in E on another platform, and would also give us access to this huge pool of titles per year. Currently, it's 110,000 titles, and it's constantly growing with both new frontlist titles and new backlist titles that have been digitized. So what we decided to do was move some of those, actually all of the Taylor and Francis approval funds that were set aside each year for TNF to Central Collection Development Fund, and this funded the majority of the EBA program's annual cost. We also decided to cancel our major annual ebook subscription with one vendor and move to another vendor, and that saved us some money there. So this funding decision was met with some skepticism from our group of selectors at Columbia. People at Columbia manage their own individual funds and were concerned that their patrons, the people that they serve at the university, would be upset that they weren't getting their frontlist titles on approval in print anymore. And they were also concerned about their funds being used for subject areas other than their own. So we started thinking a lot about how do you define success, and thinking of how we're going to evaluate this EBA program, the first of its kind at Columbia. And, as is, I'm sure, typical, you think of generally good use of a collection as a definition of success, good value, and whether your patrons and your selectors are happy. We certainly had great use in the first program year. So 26,000 titles were used in the first year, which equals about 29% of all the titles in the access pool, which is even better than most of our front list purchases. Most titles were used only once. A majority, though, were also used 2 to 7 times, and then we even had some titles used up to 100 times. We had strong usage across LC classes in proportion actually to the amount of titles within each LC class. So for instance, social sciences was the largest grouping of titles in the access pool and comprised about 30% of the collection, and 25% of the titles that were used were also classified as social sciences. So this wasn't a surprise, but it was just nice to see that there wasn't anything kind of unusual going on in terms of usage across the subject areas. We also had great usage across both the front list and the backlist titles, which was really exciting to see because we had considered a number of EBA plans, some that were only front list, some that were only backlist, some that were combinations. And we had great usage with the front list titles, if you're counting titles that have been published in the last few years. Usually the most recent 3 years are considered front list, but it can take a little while for those titles to garner some use. So great use in the front list, and then really great use in the backlist. If you look down at the last line there in this table, the deep backlist of 1999 and older titles had 25% of the usage across this first year. So the next question was, did our skeptical selectors consider the EBA program a success? We certainly did as part of the EBA strategy team, but we wanted to know what other people felt. And so we sent out there goes my watch. Sorry. Hi, Siri. We sent out a survey. We had 12 people respond. 4 of these people were in library leadership, either directors or associate university librarians, and 8 people who responded were selectors or liaisons to departments. Almost everybody, all but one, considered the first program year to be a success. When we asked them to rate their level of satisfaction on a scale from 1 to 5, most people responded with a 4 or a 5, showing that they were actually quite satisfied. And then we asked, what do you see as the primary benefits of this program? Almost everyone responded to large pool of titles. It really is a very large access pool. They also liked the ability to utilize the usage data to inform a collection's decisions, having access to front list and backlist titles, the ability to select the titles that we own at the end of the year, and saving some time in reviewing Taylor and Francis slips. We actually thought that last one would be a little bit more popular, but it wasn't. And then we also asked just an open-ended question: how do you define success in a collecting program? We got some expected answers, but I think for me the most surprising answer was one person really thought that we should be considering all formats, and this was the person who did not consider this program to be a success. So that is something that we need to think about moving forward. This only considered ebooks. It did not consider print. It didn't consider things like oral histories or videos. And also considering open access potentially, although doesn't really work in an EBA plan, but thinking about just collecting programs in general, thinking of what are our missions and what do we really want to achieve when we come up with new collecting programs. Finally, to summarize, most people that we surveyed within the Columbia University Libraries thought that this EBA program was a success. We're now investigating additional EBA programs for the next fiscal year. And I hope that when we have time for discussion at the end, that you can tell me what you think makes for a successful collecting program. Thank you very much.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Brent Appling, and I'm the collection assessment librarian at the Thomas Cooper Library at the University of South Carolina, and I'm talking about solving the print issue, assessing and reducing the print footprint of a large academic library. Basically, I'm just going to talk about some strategies that we've deployed recently to try to get a handle of increasing problem with just too much print and not enough space. So just to give you a little background, we are made up of 5 libraries, including Thomas Cooper Library, which is our main undergraduate library, and we do have an off-storage holding facility that we refer to as the Library Annex. Between all that, we maintain about 3.2 million print volumes, give or take who's coming up with that number. And space has emerged as an ongoing challenge. And a lot of this was kind of driven by a project from fall of 2019, where we were taking a level that was filled with book stacks. This was our science floor, so call number ranges Q to Z, and taking that and turning it into something a little bit more student friendly. And this was something that we had to do very quickly. We got funding in November of 2019, and by January of 2020, we had basically a new floor that had a lot more collaborative student space and individual study space as well, something that student government really drove and kind of pushed for stuff like this, because our building is busting at the seams, both with people and with books. So what did we do with all that print? We started with about 230,000 print volumes on this level, and we moved out over 100,000 volumes to an additional offsite storage facility that we actually had to lease in addition to the annex, which is a whole other issue entirely, that we call the warehouse. And we did hire outside movers to do a lot of that. And really that was headed by our Associate Dean of Collections, Miranda Bennett. Shout out to her, who organized that project very much. I did help with some of the figuring out what we were going to do, but essentially we decided we were going to choose mostly serials on that floor, move them out to the warehouse, and then figure out what to do with them from there. But this did bring up a bigger issue, which is the overall print issue. Our shelves throughout all of the 4 floors that hold our print holdings are so full that it's hard to even do just normal shifting projects. It's hard to even put in new material. No comprehensive print assessment has really ever been done. And our library annex at the time was 85% full. It's now even fuller. So 85% and counting, and circulation of print on a steady decline. We had 25% drop from 19 to 20, and of course a giant drop from 20 to 21, but that of course was mostly due to COVID and us not being open for much of that time. So what we started with was some low-hanging fruit and looked at perpetual digital access for print journals. So we looked at our JSTOR collections, Sage backfile purchases that we've made, and Elsevier backfile purchases that we made, and cross-check that with our print coverage. So within JSTOR holdings, we've been fortunate enough to be able to purchase several collections within them. So Arts and Sciences collections 1 through 7, the Life Sciences collection, and the Business collection 3, around 1,200 electronic titles. Out of those, we hold 503 in print, which broken down to volumes is 22,000 that were held at the annex, and over 12,000 that were held at Thomas Cooper, all of which we were able to withdraw on deaccession, which brings us to the collaboration part, where I worked with the acquisition staff and the annex manager. And what we did, well, what I did mostly was check JSTOR coverage against print coverage, establish data needs. So we needed that MMS ID number from Alma for the annex to be able to withdraw them, and then designed a workflow where I basically sent out spreadsheets, annex manager coordinated the withdrawals, acquisition staff coordinated the deletion of records within Alma, our ILS. So other back files that we looked at were Sage and Elsevier. These, again, several hundred titles between the two, held many of them in print, several thousand print volumes, were held throughout the annex, Thomas Cooper, and our leased warehouse. So we're able to start making some moves with taking out volumes from there as well. So within all of it, we were able to withdraw about a little less than 50,000. In fact, the only ones that we've actually done so far are the JSTOR titles. We're still working toward the Sage and Elsevier, but we are ready with the data. We just have to get to the actual physical part of it. But there will be a good bit withdrawn. Of course, that really doesn't make much of a dent in that 3.2 million volumes, but it is a start, right? We're at least confident that we now know what we can look at and say, you know, we're confident that we have perpetual access to this. We can get rid of the print for it. So next steps within this was not just the accessioning stuff that we have physically already, but also what's coming in that we're still currently getting. And that's current print subscriptions and print standing orders. And when I started looking at this, I was quite shocked to see how many print subscriptions we were still getting. I can't remember the exact number, but the cost of it was quite staggering. But I don't necessarily want to divulge that here. But it was surprising. So started looking at that. It did require a good bit more collaboration, mostly with subject liaisons, and the creation of some new workflows where basically the liaison was now involved in helping with decision making. So we've completed 2 rounds of print serial subscription review. Most of these are print journals, but we were looking at popular magazines and some newspapers as well. But for the most part, it was print journals. So we reviewed everything that we have managed by EBSCOnet and Harasovitz. So there are some outstanding titles that I have to get a hold of too. So we gathered data on that, which I'll show you an example of how that looked in a second. Created lists for liaisons to review, and 19 in total, just based on subject and or content type. So if it was reference type material or going straight to one of our special collections libraries, that would be a little bit outside of subject area. And then worked with liaisons to make decisions to cancel or to keep or to switch online. And what was nice about this is we did establish a methodology for being able to do this every year now. So we're going to be doing this pretty much every spring until we're confident we've got a nice clean set of print subscriptions that we actually need and can't get in any other way. So what this kind of looked like is we looked for, obviously we had title, we looked at renewal cost, we looked at if there was alternative options available, what would that cost? In other words, online only. And then of course we looked at current online coverage. We have a lot, because we're part of a consortium, we do have a lot of aggregator coverage. And if we had coverage on that and it was a title that really wasn't getting a lot of print use, even if it was, we really considered going ahead and canceling. So we did have some historical print use as well, which is a little hazy because our serials don't actually circulate. So it's really based mostly ILL numbers. We're making up those checkouts. And then of course we had the liaison telling us whether or not we should keep them. And they were getting in contact with their faculty and making sure that that stuff was good. So the results of that, 2020 was really the first big round where we looked at 409 titles, managed to cancel a little more than half, renewed the rest, switched a few online, and wound up actually taking about $50,000 of annual cost out of our annual spend. 2021, we had less titles to review because we canceled a bunch in 2020. Still managed to pick up some cancellations based on, well, you had another year to look at it. Do you still think you need it? In many cases, not so much. So out of the 2 years, we're really getting a lot of stuff off the books, both cost-wise and incoming into print or incoming into the library, which also reduces the amount of staff time dedicated to it as well. So the next phase was, well, actually it's not really a phase, it's in conjunction with print serials with standing orders review. And this one, I gotta admit, I'm still having trouble getting, wrapping my mind around all of it. Basically the same process, working with liaisons, gathering as much evidence of use as we can, and looking at everything that we have. So we reviewed 377 monograph standing orders and 392 serial standing orders. Caveat there is our acquisitions, head of acquisitions could really only give me a big list of stuff. And some of it is probably things that are already closed. But in doing so, I have been able to go ahead and cancel or close most of those monograph standing orders, serial standing orders, a little bit more complicated. Gonna keep working on that, see how that goes. Benefits of this so far has been we are reducing print footprint both currently and in the future. We've been establishing lots of methodologies. We're freeing up space all throughout libraries and reducing annual spend and time committed to print. So how this will go in the future, we're going to continue reviewing these annually. Going to get a hold on the stuff that I haven't gotten a hold of. And one of the things I really want to do is start communicating the benefits of this work to faculty and stakeholders outside university libraries. And I'll wrap it up there. Thank you. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me or ask at the end of the session.
Hi, my name is James, and today I'll be taking you on a quick trip around some curves and turns that are sometimes thrown at you as a library professional. So please sit back, buckle up, and enjoy the ride as we hit the road on how to make good collection development decisions for your library and state. Today's trip will have us considering new roles and responsibilities that all of us experience on our professional life. These changes or transitions can sometimes be our most difficult challenges, yet bring us the most joy. I recently experienced such a change in my role as social sciences librarian. In 2018, I was appointed to become the collection development coordinator on top of my role as social sciences librarian. This added responsibility would have me lead collection development and work with the materials budget, but even more challenging, the new role meant being the standing member on our state consortium. I'd consider my institute to be mid-sized with lots of ambition. We try to do a lot with what we have and try to do everything well. We seek to make collection decisions that benefit our whole community rather than just one group. Such a goal is not always easy, but we continue to try. Like so many libraries, we face similar budget difficulties. It's hard to meet everyone's resource needs when the cost of materials continue to rise, but your budget doesn't. This is why making smart and informed decisions is crucial to collection development success, although it means in many cases you face limitations. Let's consider my library's material budget, for example. We generally use 5 fund codes. I'm sure most institutes take a similar approach. Take a guess which part of the pie is for journals and databases. It's not the little slices, as they represent monographs. This is why having a consortium is so crucial. There's lots of regional and state consortiums. I put a few on this slide. Of course, you might say, where's this one or that one, or why isn't mine on there? This is just a snapshot of a few. At ODU, Viva is the most important to us, and they help us meet the resource needs of our community. And Viva does so much for the Commonwealth of Virginia. The organization started in the early 90s in an effort to provide needed resources to higher education institutes in Virginia. What started as a cooperative for book sharing has grown leaps and bounds over the years, and the collection development efforts are second to none. I thought when first taking on the role of collections coordinator that ODU's materials budget was large, but I was in for a shock when finding out how much larger Viva's budget turned out to be. Of course, this just made me realize how many more challenging this new responsibility entailed. You should always read the fine print. If the size of the budget wasn't scary enough, then add all the institute's students and faculty that depend on the resources and services provided by Viva. The reach is quite large and spans a large scope. ODU is one of 6 doctoral institutes making up standing member on the Collection Development Committee, also affectionately known as COCO. Like so many consortiums, Viva provides electronic access to over 63 resources. Part of the COCO's role is to decide how those resources will be paid for. There's general funds, cost shares, various opt-out options. On and on it goes. It's quite a lot to digest if you're just a social sciences librarian by trade. The expectations to be on COCO are taken quite seriously. As you can see from the slide, it's a formal assignment essential to the consortium. Talk about pressure. And after 12 slides, this gets me to what I want to emphasize in today's ride. Being the good librarian that I believe myself to be, I decided to do my research. I quickly decided that whenever anyone is asked to serve on a state, regional, or national committee, there's a transition period. Some aren't as challenging as all, but if you find yourself in this place, how do you look around the curve not to crash? In Michael Watkins' book, The First 90 Days, he talks about finding yourself in a new role, which I think can be applied to community work too. It's all about making good first impressions and starting off on the right foot. I believe the very first critical step to any new responsibility is listening. Very much like Watkins, Patrick Lencioni in his book, The Ideal Team Player, thinks portraying yourself as an ideal team player is critical. He urges readers to utilize social/emotional intelligence, to be humble and to be hungry. I believe taking this approach is critical when taking on a new role. But one must also consider the challenges of being on a team. Once again, Patrick Lencioni in his book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, provides sage advice to anyone joining a new team. Success means focusing on trust, conflicts, commitment, accountability, and results. In regards to consortiums, if you find yourself new to the team, by all means become very familiar with the website. Read all the documents sent to you. Get a lay for the land before becoming a bulldozer. Talk to your colleagues, as some of them may have served on the very same committee. Above all, listen. Keep in mind, Rome wasn't built in a day, nor by one person. If you find yourself on one of these types of teams, you're there for a reason. So try to be the ideal team player. That doesn't mean be shy and say nothing. Rather, try to make a positive contribution. Trust your team leadership, as you're new and they've probably been there for a while. The key to success is remembering, on a consortium, you're not just thinking of your institute. There's a bigger picture, which is only achieved if all work together. It's truly a time to be selfless and think about the greater good of all. In the end, it's all about the success of everyone, not just yourself. One thing is for sure, the relationships and knowledge you establish will be priceless in all that you do in the future. There's great satisfaction taken on something new and feeling like you're helping so many. Thanks for listening, and good luck with those changes and transitions come your way.
All right, that was our speakers for the morning. Would anybody have any questions from the audience here or from or in the chat for our speakers? I did have a question. Let me go get my, I wrote them down. So, Scott, on your digital initiatives, if you can come up here and we'll ask a question about your digital initiatives. How many people are on your teams at this point?
With the digital initiatives, it's basically me. I have a local history expert who helps with the local digital collections. And we have, for the data management services, we have kind of a small group. There are 3 librarians, me included, and we just kind of got together and set up the services based on the data management lifecycle. But basically, it's just me kind of trying to spin a lot of plates. Don't really even have time to have student assistants, you know, because of the training time that would take. And so that's something that we'll look to towards the future. So,
because I know that Coastal Carolina is a growing university at this point.
Yeah.
All right, I've got a question for Katherine. Catherine's coming back up to answer the question, so we can. So somebody's interested in knowing if you plan on adding additional EBA based on the success, or are you going to do other publishers for the future?
Hi, thank you for the question. Yes, we do plan to add another EBA program, or maybe even more than one, hopefully in the next fiscal year. So we're starting to investigate that possibility, look into which vendors might work for us, and hopefully that'll get started possibly within this fiscal year, which has not been going for that long. Our fiscal year goes until June 30th, or perhaps the following fiscal year. So I would say that in general, it's been a positive experience with some hiccups at the beginning, but we would definitely like to try it again.
Stay there, because somebody's asking, do you utilize DDA?
We don't.
Wait, I don't know if anybody heard the question is, do they utilize DDA?
We do not actually have any DDA programs, and we don't plan on having any. We spent a long time looking into those options when we were trying to decide which program to start with, and we did investigate a number of DDA options and EBA options, but we thought that EBA was better for us, and we also thought that our selectors would appreciate a little bit more control, whereas DDA, the patron, has a bit more control. Thank you.
And we have questions for Brent. Come on up. Okay. So the first question is, what was the percentage cost increase for switching from print to online?
Oh, you know, that's not, I don't know if I've actually crunched the numbers on that, but it wasn't terrible. If we had tried to switch a huge amount of titles to online only, we wouldn't have been able to afford that. I think the offset when you took out, when you calculated the renewal versus the renewal to online only, the increase was maybe between 30 and 50%, depending on the title. It was more always. That's something I'd have to go back and actually look at the details for, though. Good question. Something I hadn't thought about actually presenting. All I had really done was just subtract the offset from the total that we wound up saving, which if I remember correctly, I think it was a difference of around $2,000. But we didn't switch that many titles for each round.
Then another question for you. The question is, did you face any pushback about weeding? And how did you explain the project to your liaisons in a way that encouraged them to cooperate?
Sure.
That's a great
That's a
question.
really good question. I didn't really receive pushback, but we did have a culture of we don't want to throw anything away. But with being able to explain, we do have perpetual digital access to a lot of the stuff that we're doing, looking at especially the first round of looking at back files and JSTOR coverage, that really didn't receive much of a pushback at all. I did have some pushback from liaisons occasionally with specific titles where it's just sort of that idealistic view is we should have this, and if it's not electronically available or it's not affordable, then we sort of lean toward keeping it. What was the second part of that?
And then for liaisons, how did you encourage them?
Sure. So mostly I just encourage them by saying that this is we're at a critical needs point at this time. I think they were often encouraged by seeing how much work I was putting into it and doing a lot of the stuff as far as I was looking to see what kind of electronic access we did have, what the different options were. And on case by case or title by title instances, I would be there to help make a final decision. And the other part was I let them know that it is their final decision at the end of the day. I might encourage a certain decision, but if they disagreed with me, then that's okay. We never got to a point where there was any sort of necessarily infighting about it. We were just have a discussion. If they had an opinion that differed from mine, that's okay. We still went forward with whatever they thought. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody. It's about time to close this session down, and we are glad that you joined us virtually or in person. And if you want, we'll be doing another one today and this afternoon. We'll have 2 more stopwatches and then one on Friday. So hope you have a good morning and have a good rest of your conference. Thanks.